So today I'm going to talk about gluten-free diet, living well, thriving on a gluten-free life. So firstly, just to get a bit of context, we're looking at gluten and the gluten-free diet. So gluten's a protein, namely in the grains of wheat, barley and rye. And with people with celiac disease, their autoimmune system reacts to the gluten and essentially attacks the body. So this causes damage to the villi in the small intestine and can make absorption of nutrients more challenging, and can cause a whole range of symptoms and complications that Andrew and Alistair are going to talk about later. Currently, the only treatment is a strict gluten-free diet, and most people see significant improvement in symptoms on the gluten-free diet. In fact, many of you might have seen a survey that went around in 2024. We did the Coeliac Health Survey looking at diagnosis, symptoms and people's journeys with celiac disease, and we found 96% of people who are diagnosed with celiac disease had a significant improvement on the gluten-free diet, so it works well. Right, so going through, how do we build a balanced gluten-free diet without too much stress? Looking at three important aspects for that. Firstly, naturally gluten-free wherever possible. So looking at fruit, vegetables, rice, gluten-free grains, potato, lentils, pulses, things like that. Naturally gluten-free foods are often less expensive and less processed and more nutrient dense than the gluten-free alternatives to gluten-containing foods. For the more packaged products, label reading is essential. So how do we know it's gluten-free? The most straightforward thing is if it's labelled as gluten-free, or even better if it has the gluten-free certification. If not, it's checking that ingredients list. So if foods are manufactured in New Zealand and Australia, if they don't say they have wheat, barley, rye, oats, gluten on the ingredients or the food label, then no gluten-containing grains were made in the manufacture of the product. So just remembering that these products change from time to time, so always checking those products. And the may contain statement, it warns of traces of gluten getting unintentionally in a food due to their manufacturing lines, but it doesn't give an indication of the risk of that, whether a gluten is present. So it's your really, again, the decision up to you whether you decide to eat it or not, unfortunately. But the general rule of thumb is, if in doubt, leave it out. A few caveats to the wheat, barley and rye are these four ingredients that are derived from wheat, but they're so highly processed that they contain no detectable gluten, so are okay to be included. In New Zealand, we're quite lucky in terms of our packaging that all allergens need to be labelled in bold on the back of the product. So if it has gluten in it, it should be written in bold on the product. We also are more stringent with our parts per million guidance. So in New Zealand, no detectable gluten is less than 3 parts per million, whereas other places in the world, the Codex international standard is 20 parts per million. But this doesn't take into consideration when we're out and about. So we've got 3 products here. I'm hoping to get a bit of interaction. The first is a club sandwich. So can anybody shout out any potential sources of gluten in that club sandwich? The ham, yep. The spreads, yeah. Oh, the cross-contamination with the butter. Mayonnaise. There's a really big one. The bread, and any condiments, absolutely, and where it's been made. If it's made in a cafe, what sort of cross-contamination procedures have they put in place? This is actually a gluten-free vegan corn club sandwich, so it is actually gluten-free, so it's really hard to tell just by looking at it what it is. The second one is the hot chips. So, yep. Fryer oil. Anything else? The seasonings, yep, absolutely. I guess if you're having tomato sauce on it. So that's probably the most high risk one, particularly if you're looking at its sort of food truck type things that don't state specifically they've got separate fryers. Quite a high risk, even though potatoes are naturally gluten-free, it's quite a high risk one there. And the last one is a cinnamon hot chocolate. Yes. Yeah. Yes, so some of them malted, they could have malted products in there. Marshmallows, not all marshmallows are gluten-free. And again, those cross-contamination factors there. A few more different hidden sources of gluten there. Just one that's come up to me in the past is grated cheese. So, for example, you expect grated cheese to be dairy-free. Some of the cheaper brands using starch-based flour to keep it separated, rather than most use potato starch. And always checking medications and supplements for gluten. The soy sauces, yeah. Yes, yeah. So soy sauce is another common one. Cross-contamination, as I'm sure you're aware, a really small amount of gluten, 10 to 50 milligrams of gluten can trigger intestinal damage. So that's roughly equivalent to 1 crumb or 1/350th of a slice of toast. So really small amounts. And that daily exposure is cumulative. So we want to make sure that we're doing all we can in terms of cross-contamination, using clean utensils, separate clean chopping boards. Spreads and condiments are a common one. So either using a separate spoon or separate condiments. Different pasta water, boiling your pasta in a different pot to gluten-containing pasta. Different fry oil, same thing. And gluten-free foods in separate containers. So if you have a biscuit tin, not chucking them all in together, because there's that risk of cross-contamination. And away from home, so this is where often people feel the most anxious, because we are eating outside our own kitchen and we're relying on the knowledge of other people to provide safe food for us. And things like mixed platters, cabinet food, gluten light options that I've seen out and about make this all a bit more challenging. So I think planning ahead is key. So looking at the menus ahead of time, if you can, to identify safe options, can easily quickly rule out a place if you're unsure, or calling ahead, especially smaller cafes or if you're travelling a long way. If you are going to friends' places for dinner or children's sleepovers, things like that, whether you can just talk through the menu ahead of time, bring something, offer to bring a dish, that sort of thing. I think planning ahead wherever possible, and advocating. If you feel confident enough to saying, I have celiac disease, I need to be strictly gluten-free, and I think that helps to increase awareness for other people, and understanding that it's a necessity, it's not a choice, it's not a fad, and a crumb can cause a big problem. I think if you get a glazed look when you say celiac, you might want to reconsider where you're eating. And also knowing the risks. So are you going to a small fish and chip shop with a single fryer that may or may not cater for gluten-free, or is it a large chain restaurant with cross-contamination and hygiene procedures? Even better, has it been endorsed by a program like the Dining Out program, so you know that they understand what gluten-free is? And having a backup plan, so whether it's bringing a snack, having something beforehand if you're going to a work function, don't know what the canapes are going to be like, it really takes the pressure off, and it means you can make informed choices and decisions. And I think confidence doesn't come from avoiding these situations. It comes from mitigating the risk, planning ahead, and so you can choose how you want to go ahead. So avoiding nutrition gaps. So these are sort of 4 nutrients that in adults have been shown to be low in people diagnosed with celiac disease. So firstly, iron. Again, due to that gut damage, the body can't absorb iron as well from the diet. So it's more often low. So because the gut takes a while to heal, we want to make sure that we're choosing really iron-rich foods to replace those stores. So meat, fish, tofu, green leafy vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, and a number of fortified gluten-free foods, good sources. Pairing it with vitamin C can help the absorption of iron. B vitamins, again, due to that reduced absorption, B vitamins can be low, and we also the gluten-free diet is often lower in these B vitamins. Firstly, I think 2023, we started fortifying our gluten-containing flour with folate, and that's not the case with all gluten-free flours, so we're getting less folate. We're also removing a lot of the whole grains common whole grains that we're eating, which contain a lot of B vitamins, and going for more refined carbohydrate sources. So we really want to aim for whole foods, whole grains wherever possible, and prioritising foods naturally rich in B vitamins. Calcium and vitamin D are really important for our bone density, and low bone mineral density is another common thing at diagnosis. For adults, we're aiming for about 1,000 milligrams per day, and dairy is one of the best sources of calcium. There is calcium in other foods, but dairy is our sort of highest source, and around a glass of milk is around a third of our daily calcium requirements as adults. And if we spreading it over the day can help with absorption. We want to couple that with vitamin D. It helps absorption of calcium. And vitamin D we get a lot of our vitamin D from the sun, so it's quite a challenge to get enough vitamin D over the winter months. So a lot of us need supplementation to up our vitamin D intake. Particularly around now to around October in New Zealand. A lot of people some people find that they become intolerant to lactose due to the gut lining damage. So you may need for the first 2 or 3 months to choose lactose-free options, but generally this is transient. And last one, fibre is another nutrient that we need to keep an eye on, and it often drops off when we start a gluten-free diet inadvertently, because we're removing again those whole grains and often replacing it with gluten-free products which are made from refined flours and starches and much lower in fibre. Fibre plays an important role in gut health, digestion, and supports the healthy gut microbes, and it also helps to keep us nice and full. So adults need around 25 to 30, it is recommended that adults have around 25 to 30 grams of fibre per day, and actually a lot of the general population is not achieving this. If we do have a diet low in fibre, increasing it slowly, because increasing quickly can cause some tummy symptoms. So rather than focusing on cutting out foods, fibre is a really great example of foods that we want to add in. So small consistent changes can really help to boost up that fibre intake. and we're looking for naturally gluten-free foods that are high in fibre, like fruit and vegetables, adding nuts, legumes, pulses, things like that into our diet, adding sprinkling to a salad, adding to breakfast cereals, things like that, and choosing whole grain gluten-free foods, so the brown rice, quinoa, buckwheat, and gluten-free things like whole grain gluten-free breads, things like that. And again, variety is key. So the gut microbiome is crucial for our overall health, immune and digestive function, and fibre fuels those gut microbes. So when we start a gluten-free diet, we are often, although it's essential, we might inadvertently be leading to microbiome imbalances that can impact gut health. The shift in bacterial composition can be negatively associated with immune function, gut barrier health, and the gut inflammatory properties. Strategies that increase fibre, prebiotics, probiotics, and whole foods can help counter these effects, promoting more healthier, diverse gut microbiome. So what can we do? Increasing fibre-rich gluten-free foods to help the the beneficial bacteria in our gut, improve short-chain fatty acid production, and that feeds our gut. Opting for whole foods rather than the processed foods, which are much lower in fibre, higher in sugar, and also we know that can negatively impact our gut health. And I mentioned briefly the probiotics. Strains like Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, Bifidobacterium longum, and Bacillus coagulans, have shown potential benefits in people diagnosed with celiac disease. However, there's limited clear evidence at the moment, but I think as research progresses, we may see new treatments and dietary management strategies designed specifically for the microbiome of people diagnosed with celiac. So, eating gluten-free on a budget is one of the biggest challenges at the moment, with the cost of living and the cost of gluten-free products being significantly higher than their gluten-containing alternatives. But the gluten-free diet doesn't have to break the bank. I think looking at gluten-free eating, like you say, eating like Nana used to eat, meat and 3 veg, so we're choosing the naturally gluten-free foods over the really expensive gluten alternatives, if that makes sense. And again, planning is key, so avoiding waste, meal planning to avoid waste and impulse purchases, bulk buying and freezing, keeping the freezer stocked full of things that go-to foods like meals, snacks, lunchbox fillers, things like that. Watching those specialty aisles, there's often a gluten-free alternative in the mainstream aisles rather than choosing a specifically gluten-free product. I think I saw frozen spinach with a gluten-free label on, and actually it's not a common gluten-containing food. And looking at affordable proteins, this is not specifically gluten-free, but things like meat are quite expensive now, so looking at things like beans, lentils, chickpeas, canned fish, eggs that you can use to sort of tofu, all of those sort of things that you can use instead of or to complement the meat proteins. And eating out is and those processed packaged foods are a real killer to the budget. So wherever possible, it's looking at things like, could you do homemade fast food? So having frozen fish and chips in the freezer as a go-to grab meal if you need to, frozen gluten-free pizza bases that you can put the toppings you like on, things like that are easy and convenient, and rather than the very, very expensive takeaways at the moment. That's me.